Hello everyone, I'm the Storyteller, and I'm here to guide you through another tale of mystery and suspense. I know many of you listen to these stories to unwind or fall asleep, so before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know in the comments where you're from and what time it is as you're watching this. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and let the story unfold. It was Halloween night, and the entire town was lit up with glowing pumpkins and vibrant lights. Children were running around in their spooky costumes, collecting candy from every doorstep, while adults enjoyed the festive atmosphere. But for Sam, the night was an opportunity for something a little different. Sam was a teenager with a passion for all things scary. While his friends preferred Halloween parties, Sam loved exploring the mysterious and unknown. That night, he'd heard about a street on the outskirts of town called Black Gate Street, which had been closed off for years after a mysterious incident. No one dared to go there, and the stories around it only made it more intriguing. His friends told him the rumors. The last house on that street was once home to a reclusive man who was said to practice dark arts. One night, years ago, the residents of the house disappeared without a trace. Since then, the street was believed to be haunted, and anyone who entered never returned. Sam, of course, didn't believe in ghost stories. He thought it was all just local folklore meant to scare kids. But his curiosity got the best of him, so he decided to check it out himself on Halloween night. He figured it would be the perfect adventure. He arrived at Black Gate Street around 10 p.m. The place was deserted. No lights, no sounds, just an eerie stillness. Sam took a deep breath, his heart racing with excitement, and began walking down the street, his phone ready to document anything unusual. The further he went, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. The street felt wrong. The trees lining the sidewalk twisted unnaturally, their shadows shifting as if alive. Suddenly, Sam saw a movement in the distance, the faint outline of something shifting near the last house. His heart skipped a beat. Was someone actually there, or was it just his imagination? He approached cautiously. The front door of the house was cracked open, and one of the large windows was slightly ajar. As Sam drew closer, a foul smell hit his nose, something like dampness, maybe decay. He hesitated, but pushed the door open wider, stepping inside. The house was dark and cold, far colder than it should have been. Using his phone as a flashlight, Sam explored the decaying interior. The walls were crumbling, the furniture rotting away, but what caught his attention were the strange markings on the walls, symbols that looked ancient, though their meaning was unclear. As he reached the second floor, he heard the footsteps behind him. Sam froze. His pulse quickened. He spun around, his flashlight sweeping the hallway, but no one was there. His mind raced. Was someone playing tricks on him? Or was it just his nerves getting the better of him? He pressed on, determined, until he reached a door at the end of the hallway. The door was shut, but he felt an overwhelming urge to open it. With a deep breath, he turned the handle and pushed the door open. Inside, the room was filled with old, worn-out dolls, but they were far from ordinary. Each doll was distorted in some disturbing way, their eyes seemingly fixed on him as if they had been waiting. And before Sam could fully process what he was seeing, he heard a faint, chilling giggle behind him. Panic set in. Sam backed away, but then he felt something grip his shoulder. He tried to turn, but his body wouldn't respond. The giggling grew louder. and as it did, the dolls began to move, slowly shifting toward him. He wanted to scream, to run, but his voice was caught in his throat. The lights flickered rapidly, and with each flash, the dolls inched closer. Then everything went dark. When Sam woke up, he was back in his bed. At first, he thought it had all been a nightmare, but then he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The dolls from the house were now sitting on a shelf beside his bed, their lifeless eyes staring at him, just as they had before. From that night on, Sam was never the same again. The summer had been long, and Mark was ready for a change of scenery. His friends had heard of a place, a long-abandoned farm just outside their town, sitting on the edge of the forest. It had been empty for as long as anyone could remember, and rumors about it circulated every year. Some said it was haunted, while others believed that strange things happened there at night. To Mark, it sounded like the perfect place to explore. He and his two best friends, Tom and Rachel, decided to make a day of it. They packed up some snacks, grabbed their phones and flashlights, and headed out on a late afternoon adventure, excited to see what the old farm had in store. The road to the farm was overgrown and hardly visible. The trees around it were twisted, as if they had grown over the path on purpose, as though trying to hide something. It took them nearly an hour to reach the old, rusted gate that marked the entrance to the farm. The gate hung loosely from its hinges, swaying slightly in the breeze. Beyond it, the land stretched out before them, fields overrun with weeds, a barn that looked ready to collapse, and an old farmhouse with broken windows. "This place looks like it's been abandoned for decades," Rachel said, staring at the farmhouse. "Why would anyone just leave it like this? I don't know," Mark replied, pushing the gate open with a loud creak. "But I bet we're going to find out." They walked through the overgrown fields, the grass brushing against their legs, until they reached the farmhouse. Up close, it looked even more decayed. The paint had long since peeled off, and parts of the roof had caved in. Mark pushed open the front door, which groaned loudly in protest, and they stepped inside. The interior was just as dilapidated as the outside. Dust coated everything. The furniture had been left in place, but it was falling apart from years of neglect. Old photographs lined the walls, though they were so faded you could barely make out the faces. There was a strange stillness in the air, a quiet that made the three friends uneasy. Tom, always the curious one, wandered off toward the kitchen. "It's creepy in here," he said, shining his flashlight around. "But there's nothing really scary." Mark wasn't so sure. Something about the house felt off, like it was stuck in time, waiting for something, or someone, to return. As he wandered into what looked like the living room, he noticed a book lying on a table in the corner. It was open, though the pages were yellowed and torn. The title was barely readable, but one word stood out: Harvest. Before he could get a closer look, they heard a sound, a soft thump from upstairs. Rachel stopped mid-step, her flashlight pointing at the ceiling. "Did you hear that?" "Probably just the house settling," Tom said, though his voice didn't sound as confident as usual. Mark wasn't convinced. "Let's check it out." They made their way upstairs, each step creaking loudly under their weight. The upper floor was even darker, the windows boarded up, and the air thick with dust. There were 3 bedrooms, each one seemingly untouched since the house had been abandoned. Mark pushed open the first door. The room was empty except for an old rocking chair in the corner. The chair was slowly rocking back and forth, though no one was near it. Rachel took a step back. "Okay, that's weird," Maybe it's the wind, Tom suggested, though there was no breeze coming through the house. Mark walked over to the window and looked outside. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows over the farm. The fields below looked endless, stretching out to the edge of the forest. But something caught his eye. Movement near the barn. "Did you see that?" Mark asked, his voice hushed. "By the barn." Rachel and Tom rushed over to the window. For a moment, there was nothing but the quiet of the fading day. Then a figure appeared, moving slowly across the field toward the barn. "Is that someone else?" Rachel whispered, her grip tightening on the windowsill. Tom shook his head. "It can't be. We're the only ones out here." Mark's heart began to race. Whoever, or whatever, was moving toward the barn seemed to vanish the moment the sun dipped below the horizon. The three of them exchanged uneasy glances. "We should check it out," Mark said, though a part of him wanted to turn around and leave. They made their way out of the house and headed toward the barn. The temperature had dropped significantly, and the air felt heavy. The barn loomed before them, its doors slightly ajar. Mark hesitated, then pushed one of the doors open. Inside, the barn was dark and empty, except for a large pile of old farming tools and equipment. Tom shined his flashlight around. "I don't see anything." But then, as Rachel stepped closer, the ground beneath her gave a loud crack. She jumped back and the floorboards splintered, revealing a hidden trapdoor beneath the hay. Mark's pulse quickened. "What do you think is down there?" Rachel shook her head. "I'm not sure I want to know." Tom, always the daring one, knelt down and pulled the door open. A set of stone stairs led down into darkness. The air that rose up from the hole was cold and damp, carrying with it a musty, earthy smell. "We've come this far," Mark said, trying to sound brave. One by one, they descended the stairs, their flashlights barely piercing the darkness. At the bottom, they found themselves in a small underground room. Old wooden shelves lined the walls, filled with strange jars and tools that looked far too old to be useful. In the center of the room was a large, weathered table, and on it, an old ledger, much like the one Mark had seen in the house. Mark picked it up and opened it. The pages were filled with dates and names, but none of them made any sense, until he reached the last page. There, written in bold, black ink, was a single sentence: "The harvest comes when the sun sets." Suddenly, the door above them slammed shut. The three friends spun around, their flashlights flickering. They rushed up the stairs, but the trap door wouldn't budge. And then, from outside the barn, they heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving closer and closer to the door. From that night on, no one in town ever spoke of the farm again. The group of 4 friends had been planning their weekend getaway for weeks. College had been stressful, and they needed a break from the endless studying and deadlines. They decided to rent a cabin deep in the woods, far away from the noise of the city, where they could relax, hike, and maybe tell some ghost stories by the campfire. Mark, Sarah, Liam, and Emma piled into Mark's car early Friday morning, excited for a few days of peaceful isolation. The drive was long but scenic, winding through tall trees and endless green hills. As they neared the cabin, the paved road gave way to a dirt path that seemed to stretch into the heart of the forest. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Emma asked, glancing nervously at the thick woods surrounding them. Mark checked the GPS on his phone, frowning. "It says we're close, probably just another mile or so." The dirt road narrowed. the trees closing in tighter as the car bounced over uneven ground. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the cabin came into view. It was an old wooden structure, weathered by time, but it looked sturdy enough. There was a wide porch out front and a stone chimney that rose into the sky. "This is it," Mark announced, parking the car. "Our home for the weekend." They unpacked quickly, eager to explore their surroundings. The inside of the cabin was cozy, if a bit rustic. There were 4 small bedrooms, a living room with a fireplace, and a kitchen that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. Still, it was perfect for their needs. The first night went by smoothly. They spent the evening grilling outside and telling stories by the fire, enjoying the quiet of the woods and the cool evening breeze. But as the night grew darker, they all began to feel a strange unease, though no one said anything. It wasn't until the second day that things began to feel truly strange. After a morning hike, they returned to the cabin to find the front door slightly ajar. "Did someone leave it open?" Liam asked, looking around. "I'm sure I locked it before we left," Sarah said, frowning. She pushed the door open, and they stepped inside cautiously. Nothing seemed out of place. The furniture was just as they had left it, and nothing appeared to be missing. "Maybe it just didn't latch all the way," Mark suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. They shrugged it off and spent the afternoon playing cards and relaxing. But as the sun began to set, the feeling of unease returned, stronger than before. It was as if the woods around them were closing in, watching. Later that evening, while they were eating dinner, they heard it for the first time. A faint knocking sound coming from the front door. It was soft, almost like a light tap, but it was enough to make everyone pause. "Who could that be?" Emma asked, her voice low. Liam stood up, moving cautiously to the door. He opened it slowly, but there was no one there. He stepped outside, looking around, but the forest was still, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the wind. "No one," Liam said, closing the door behind him. "Probably just the wind." But the knocking came again, louder this time. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the cabin. Mark jumped up this time, pulling the door open in frustration. "This isn't funny." Again, no one was there. They checked the area around the cabin, walking the perimeter with flashlights, but they found nothing, not even footprints. Shaken, they returned inside, locking the door behind them. "Weird," Mark muttered, but no one had an explanation. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Mark tossed and turned, his mind replaying the strange events from earlier. Around midnight, just as he was drifting off, he heard something. A faint whisper, almost like someone calling his name. He sat up in bed, his heart pounding. "Sarah?" he called out, thinking it might be one of his friends. But the cabin was silent. He tried to ignore it, pulling the covers over his head, but the whisper came again, clearer this time. "Mark." He jumped out of bed, grabbing his flashlight, and headed for the living room. But as he stepped into the hallway, he found Liam already there, pale-faced, clutching a flashlight of his own. "Did you hear that?" Liam whispered, his voice trembling. "Someone's calling us." Before Mark could respond, Sarah and Emma emerged from their rooms, both looking equally shaken. "Something's outside," Emma said, her voice barely a whisper. They all stood in the middle of the hallway, listening. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of their breathing. Then the knocking started again, louder and more insistent this time. It was coming from every direction. On the walls, the windows, the ceiling. The cabin seemed alive with noise. "Let's get out of here," Sarah said, her voice breaking with fear. Mark nodded, but as they rushed to grab their things, the knocking grew louder, almost deafening. Suddenly, the door to the cabin flew open on its own, slamming against the wall. They froze, staring at the open door. Beyond it, the forest was pitch black, the trees standing like silent sentinels. "We're leaving," Mark said, his voice firm. But as they moved toward the door, a figure appeared in the doorway. It was tall and shadowy, its face hidden in darkness. The friends stumbled back, their hearts racing. Without another word, they ran out the back door, leaving their bags behind. They sprinted through the woods, the branches scratching at their skin, their breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind them, the knocking continued, growing fainter as they put distance between themselves and the cabin. They didn't stop running until they reached the car. Piling inside, Mark started the engine, and they sped away from the cabin, not looking back once. When they finally made it back to town, none of them spoke for a long time. They didn't talk about what they had seen or heard, and they didn't try to explain it. But one thing was certain. They would never go back to that cabin again. The cabin remained abandoned after that weekend, its door hanging open, waiting for the next group of curious explorers. But those who dared to venture near it would always return with the same story. The knocking, the whispers, and the shadow in the doorway. It was supposed to be the perfect weekend getaway. The old lake house had been in Sarah's family for generations, but no one had stayed there in years. Her grandparents had passed away, and the house had been left empty, waiting for someone to return. This weekend, Sarah and her three closest friends, Matt, Lisa, and David, had decided to do just that. They were looking forward to a few days of peace, nature, and time away from the pressures of work and life. The drive up to the lake house was long but picturesque, winding through dense forests and along the edge of a sprawling lake. The house itself sat at the end of a narrow dirt road, nestled against the water. It was old, made of weathered wood, but still charming in a rustic way. A wide porch faced the lake, and the quiet rippling of the water against the shore was the only sound to be heard. As they arrived and unloaded their bags, the group marveled at the beauty of the place. The lake reflected the orange and pink hues of the setting sun, casting a warm glow over the house. "This place is amazing," Lisa said, standing on the porch and taking in the view. "I can't believe no one's been here in so long." Sarah smiled. "Yeah, my family used to come here every summer when I was little. It feels good to be back." They spent the first evening getting settled in. The inside of the house was much like the outside, old but well preserved. The furniture was simple, the walls lined with old family photos and knickknacks that hadn't been touched in years. There was no TV, no internet, just the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. After dinner, they gathered around the fireplace in the living room, sipping hot drinks and laughing as they shared stories. The atmosphere was cozy, peaceful, everything they had hoped for. But as the night wore on, a strange feeling settled over the group. It was subtle at first, like the air in the room had grown heavier, or the shadows around them seemed just a little darker than they should be. "I don't know why," Matt said, glancing around the room, "but it feels like we're not alone here." "Don't start with the ghost stories," Lisa groaned, rolling her eyes. "This place is old, sure, but it's just a house." David, ever the joker, grinned. "Maybe it's haunted. Maybe Sarah's grandparents never really left." Sarah laughed, though it sounded a little forced. Yeah, right. I'm sure they're around somewhere, watching over us. But as the words left her mouth, the fireplace suddenly sputtered, the flames flickering wildly before going out entirely, plunging the room into darkness. What the? Matt started, but before he could finish, a loud creak echoed through the house, as if something heavy was shifting upstairs. The group froze, staring at the ceiling. Another creak, followed by a thud, then silence. Okay, that was weird, David said, breaking the tension with a nervous laugh. Old houses make noises, right? Yeah, Sarah agreed, though her voice was shaky. It's probably just settling. This place is ancient. Still, they couldn't shake the unease that lingered after the fire went out. They spent the next hour trying to relight the fireplace, but no matter what they did, the fire refused to catch. Frustrated, they eventually gave up and decided to head to bed early, hoping that a good night's sleep would make everything seem normal again. But that night, sleep was elusive. Sarah lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, listening to the strange creaks and groans of the old house. It felt as though the walls were closing in on her, the air thick and suffocating. Every time she closed her eyes, she thought she heard something, a faint whisper just at the edge of her hearing. Sarah. Her eyes snapped open, her heart pounding. She sat up, straining to listen. Nothing. The room was quiet, save for the soft sound of the wind outside. She tried to convince herself that it was her imagination, that she was just being paranoid. But then she heard it again, louder this time, a clear whisper coming from the hallway. Sarah. She grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight, her pulse racing as she swung her feet over the edge of the bed. Carefully, she opened her door and stepped into the hallway. It was empty, dark except for the faint glow of the moon coming through the window at the end. Hello? She called out softly, her voice trembling. Is anyone there? There was no answer, just the eerie silence of the old house. But then, from downstairs, came the sound of footsteps, soft, deliberate, like someone walking across the wooden floor. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't imagining it. Someone was in the house. She crept toward the stairs, shining her light down into the living room. Nothing. The room was still, the shadows deep and unmoving. Just as she was about to turn back, she saw it. A figure standing near the front door, barely visible in the dim light. It was tall and motionless, its features obscured by shadow. For a moment, Sarah couldn't move, her body frozen with fear. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. Sarah stumbled back, her heart racing as she ran to wake the others. They gathered in the hallway, wide-eyed and confused. What's going on? Matt asked, rubbing his eyes. Why are you freaking out? There was someone downstairs, Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. I saw someone. David looked skeptical. Are you sure? There's no one out here for miles. I'm sure, Sarah insisted. I saw someone. We need to check it out. Reluctantly, they all went downstairs, flashlights in hand. But when they reached the living room, it was empty. The front door was locked, and nothing was out of place. I don't like this, Lisa said, glancing nervously around the room. We should leave. Matt nodded. Yeah, maybe this wasn't such a good idea. But before they could make a decision, the creaking started again, this time from the ceiling above them. They all looked up, their flashlights illuminating the wooden beams. The noise grew louder, more insistent, like something was moving through the attic. Without a word, they ran outside, not stopping until they were on the porch. The cool night air was a relief after the suffocating atmosphere inside the house, but the eerie feeling lingered. "We're not going back in there," Sarah said firmly, her heart still racing. "We'll pack up tomorrow and leave." They spent the rest of the night outside, huddled together on the porch, watching the lake in silence. And as the first light of dawn broke over the water, they all agreed that something was wrong with that house, something that didn't want them there. When they finally left the next morning, none of them spoke about what had happened. They didn't mention the whispers, the creaking, or the figure in the doorway. But as they drove away, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the lake house was watching them leave, waiting for the next group of visitors to return. It had been years since Adam had visited the cabin deep in the woods. His father used to take him there every summer when he was a kid, but after his father's sudden passing, Adam couldn't bring himself to return. That is, until now. It was the perfect place for Adam and his friends, Ethan, Mia, and Lily, to unwind for the weekend. The idea of being away from the city, from the noise, and from all their responsibilities was exactly what they needed. Adam had finally agreed to go back to the cabin, hoping to reconnect with old memories and make new ones with his friends. The drive to the cabin was long, winding through a dense forest that seemed to stretch forever. The deeper they drove, the more isolated they became. Trees loomed on either side, their branches entwining like skeletal fingers. Even in the daylight, the forest had an eerie stillness about it, as though the trees were watching them. When they finally arrived, the cabin was just as Adam remembered. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering trees. The wooden structure was old but still sturdy. The porch, where Adam and his father used to sit for hours, remained intact, though the paint was peeling and the windows were fogged with dust. "This is incredible," Mia said, stepping out of the car and taking in the view. "I can't believe you didn't want to come back here sooner, Adam." Adam forced a smile, trying to shake the unease that had settled over him since they entered the woods. "Yeah, it's nice. I just haven't been ready." Ethan, always the adventurous one, was already unloading the gear. "This place has campfire stories written all over it," he said with a grin. "We're going to have an awesome weekend." They spent the first few hours settling in, unpacking, and exploring the area around the cabin. The lake nearby was calm, reflecting the sky like a mirror, and the air smelled fresh, untouched by civilization. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. As night fell, the group gathered around a campfire outside the cabin. The fire crackled softly as they roasted marshmallows and laughed about old memories. The stars were out in full, casting a faint glow over the clearing. But as the conversation died down and the fire began to burn lower, a strange feeling crept over them. It was subtle at first, a sense of being watched. The forest around them, which had seemed so welcoming in the daylight, now felt different. The trees, once silent and still, seemed to shift in the darkness, their shapes twisting in the flickering light. "Do you guys feel that?" Lily asked quietly, staring into the shadows between the trees. Adam glanced at her. "Feel what?" Like something's out there," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Watching us." Ethan rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on, Lily. Don't start with the creepy stuff. You're just psyching yourself out." But Adam wasn't so sure. He'd spent enough time in these woods as a kid to know that something felt different tonight. The forest had always been quiet, but this was an unnatural silence, an oppressive stillness that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Mia, sensing the tension, tried to lighten the mood. Maybe it's just a deer or something. We're in the middle of the woods after all." They all laughed, though it was forced, the unease lingering in the air. Eventually, they decided to call it a night, dousing the fire and heading back into the cabin. Adam stayed outside for a moment longer, looking out into the forest, trying to shake the feeling that something was watching them. As he turned to go inside, a movement caught his eye. Something, or someone, was standing at the edge of the tree line, just barely visible in the moonlight. Adam froze, his breath catching in his throat. But when he blinked, the figure was gone. Shaking his head, he convinced himself it was just his imagination and went inside, locking the door behind him. The first night passed uneventfully, but the next day things began to take a strange turn. The morning started like any other. Clear skies, fresh air, but as the day wore on, a thick fog began to roll in from the lake, creeping up toward the cabin. By midday, the forest around them was almost completely obscured by the mist, the trees disappearing into a shroud of white. "This is kind of eerie," Mia said, peering out the window. "I've never seen fog like this before." Ethan shrugged. "It'll burn off eventually. Fog like this is normal near a lake." But it didn't burn off. As the hours passed, the fog only grew thicker, pressing in against the cabin like a living thing. The view from the windows was gone, replaced by a wall of white. The once vibrant forest now seemed distant, unreachable. That evening, as the fog swirled around them, the strange sounds began. It started as a faint rustling, like footsteps in the underbrush, just outside the cabin. Then came the tapping, light, almost rhythmic, against the windows. "What is that?" Lily asked, her voice trembling. They all crowded around the window, but the fog was too thick to see anything beyond the glass. The tapping continued, steady and insistent, as if something was trying to get their attention. Ethan grabbed a flashlight. "I'm going out there to check." "No," Adam said sharply, grabbing his arm. "Don't go out there. We don't know what's out in that fog." Ethan hesitated, then lowered the flashlight. "Fine, but we can't just sit here all night listening to this." The tapping suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was suffocating, oppressive, as though the fog itself was holding its breath. They tried to distract themselves by playing cards and talking, but the tension in the room was palpable. Every creak of the old cabin made them jump, and every gust of wind seemed to carry whispers with it. As night fell, the fog grew darker, taking on an almost shadowy quality. The lights in the cabin flickered, and the tapping returned. Louder, more forceful. This time, it wasn't just on the windows. It was on the walls, the doors, the roof. It surrounded them, a relentless drumming that echoed through the cabin. Mia clutched her phone, her face pale. "There's something out there." Adam nodded, his heart pounding. "We're not alone." Suddenly, the lights went out. The cabin was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the dim glow of their flashlights. The tapping grew louder, more erratic, as if whatever was out there was growing impatient. "We need to get out of here," Lily whispered, her voice shaking. But before anyone could respond, there was a loud crash from the back of the cabin. Something had broken through the window. Glass shattered, and the cold, damp air of the fog-filled night rushed into the cabin. Adam grabbed a flashlight and turned it toward the sound, his hands trembling. But all he saw was fog, swirling in through the broken window, thick and heavy. And then, from the shadows of the fog, a figure emerged. It stood in the doorway, tall and unnaturally still, its face obscured by the darkness. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, watching them. "Run!" Adam shouted, grabbing Mia's hand and pulling her toward the front door. They bolted outside, into the fog. The air was cold and damp, clinging to their skin like a wet blanket. The figure followed them, its footsteps silent in the mist. They ran through the forest, barely able to see a few feet in front of them, the fog thick and disorienting. But no matter how fast they ran, the figure was always there, just at the edge of their vision, always watching. The group never spoke of what happened that night. When they finally made it out of the forest, they were shaken but alive. They never returned to the cabin, and they never told anyone about the shadowy figure in the fog. But sometimes, late at night, when the air is still and the fog rolls in thick, Adam swears he can hear it. The tapping, the whispers, and the footsteps that follow him, always just out of sight. It all started with a simple question on Reddit. The user, known only by the handle Unseen Entity, posted a thread in the paranormal subreddit titled, "What's the scariest thing that's ever happened to you that you can't explain?" It wasn't a new question. People asked it all the time. Stories would pour in about strange noises in the night, ghost sightings, and mysterious figures at the end of dark hallways. Most of the time, the stories were thrilling but harmless. They made for good reading, but no one really believed them. But this time, something was different. I remember seeing the thread the night it went up. I was scrolling through the subreddit, looking for something to pass the time before bed. I clicked on Unseen Entity's post out of curiosity. The comments were already filling up with the usual tales of haunted houses and shadowy figures, but one reply caught my eye. It was from a user named Deepwatcher, and their comment was simple. "There are some things better left forgotten." No one really paid attention to it at first. Reddit being Reddit, people brushed it off as some edgy attempt to sound cryptic. But then something strange happened. People started responding to the comment, not with jokes or more stories, but with questions. Personal questions. "Do you know what happened in 1997? One user asked. "Is it true they've been watching us?" said another. There were dozens of replies like that, all asking cryptic questions about seemingly unrelated events. The thread took a turn from the usual scary stories and devolved into something else, something unsettling. It was as if Deepwatcher knew something no one else did, something hidden in plain sight. Then Unseen Entity posted again, asking Deepwatcher directly, "What do you mean, better left forgotten? What do you know?" The comment disappeared almost immediately after it was posted. Not deleted by the moderators, not removed by the user, just gone. A few people saw it, myself included, but when I tried to refresh the page, the entire thread had vanished. It was as if it had never existed. For a moment, I thought it was just a glitch. Reddit was known to have them every now and then. But when I searched for the thread again, it was nowhere to be found. Even my browser history didn't show that I had clicked on it. I checked the user profiles for Unseen Entity and Deepwatcher, but both accounts had been deleted. I thought that was the end of it. Just another strange internet mystery with no answer. But a few days later, something even weirder happened. I received a private message from a user with no username, no profile picture, and no post history. The message was simple. "You saw the thread, didn't you?" My heart raced as I stared at the screen. How did this person know? I hesitated before replying. "Yes, I saw it. What happened to it?" The response came almost immediately. "They're watching. Be careful." That was it. No explanation, no follow-up. I tried messaging back, but the account had already been deleted. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. Everywhere I went, I felt like I was being watched. I started noticing strange things. Small, barely perceptible at first, but enough to make me question what was real. A car would park outside my apartment for hours without anyone getting in or out. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and swear I could hear footsteps in the hallway, even though I lived alone. Then came the dreams. Every night, I had the same dream. I was in a dark room, sitting in front of a computer screen. On the screen was the Reddit thread, the one from Unseen Entity. But no matter how many times I refreshed the page, the comment from Deepwatcher wouldn't appear. The dream would always end the same way. A shadowy figure would appear behind me, and I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. I stopped going on Reddit after that. I didn't want to risk seeing something I shouldn't again. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. In fact, it got worse. I started getting phone calls from unknown numbers, always at odd hours of the night. When I answered, there was nothing but static on the other end. One night, I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating on the nightstand. The screen lit up with another unknown number. This time, I didn't answer. I just watched as it rang, my body frozen with fear. When the call ended, a new message appeared. "You need to stop asking questions." I dropped the phone, my hands shaking. How did they know? I hadn't asked anyone about the thread since that last message. I hadn't even mentioned it to my friends. That's when I decided to leave. I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend in another city for a few days. I needed to clear my head, to get away from whatever this was. But even at my friend's place, the sense of being followed didn't leave me. I'd see the same unfamiliar faces in different parts of the city, as if they were watching me from a distance. One night, while I was lying awake, my phone buzzed with a new message. I knew before I even looked at it who it was from. "It's too late. They know where you are." I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even bother packing when I left the next morning. I just got in my car and drove, not caring where I ended up. All I knew was that I needed to get as far away from Greywood and that cursed thread as possible. It's been a few weeks now, and I've moved to a new city. I haven't been back on Reddit since, and I've done my best to stay off social media entirely. But the feeling of being watched has never left. Every time I pass by a dark alley or see a car idling on the street, I wonder if they're still watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. I don't know who Deepwatcher was or what they meant by "some things are better left forgotten." But I do know this. Some threads on Reddit lead to places you can never come back from, and some questions should never be asked. Greywood Forest was the kind of place that didn't show up on most maps. It was deep in the countryside, far from any major city, and surrounded by legends that kept most people away. The locals whispered about strange lights, eerie sounds, and people who had wandered in only to disappear without a trace. But to 4 friends, Ethan, Lily, Ben, and Rachel, it sounded like the perfect place for an adventure. It was Ethan's idea to go camping there. He had heard about the place from an old family friend who used to live in the area. The stories intrigued him, and soon enough, he had convinced the others that a weekend in Greywood would be fun. "It's just a forest," Ethan had said confidently as they planned the trip. People always come up with crazy stories about places like this. We'll spend a couple of nights there, take some pictures, and have a great time." Ben, ever the skeptic, laughed. "Yeah, maybe we'll find Bigfoot or something." Lily and Rachel were less enthusiastic, but decided to go along with the plan. They packed their tents, food, and camping gear, ready for what they thought would be a weekend of hiking and stargazing. The drive to Graywood was long and quiet. As they got closer, the roads became narrower, winding through thick forests with towering trees. The deeper they went, the more isolated they felt. The houses they passed grew fewer and farther between until there were none at all. Just miles of dense, dark woods. When they finally reached the edge of Graywood Forest, the sun was already beginning to set. The sky was tinged with orange and purple, casting long shadows across the trees. A single dirt path led into the forest, disappearing into the gloom. "This is it," Ethan said, pulling the car to a stop. "Welcome to Graywood." The group got out of the car, the air around them heavy with the smell of damp earth and pine. The silence was almost unsettling. No birds, no insects, just the rustle of leaves in the breeze. "Creepy," Rachel muttered as she shouldered her backpack. Lily nodded, glancing around. "Let's just set up camp before it gets too dark." They followed the narrow path deeper into the forest, the trees closing in around them. It wasn't long before they found a small clearing, surrounded by thick undergrowth. It seemed like the perfect spot to set up camp, so they quickly pitched their tents and started a fire. As the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the forest into darkness, the group sat around the fire, laughing and telling stories. The flickering flames cast strange, dancing shadows across the trees, and for a while, everything felt normal. But as the night wore on, the atmosphere began to change. The wind picked up, whistling through the branches, and the shadows seemed to grow darker, deeper. Ben was the first to notice. "Do you guys hear that?" Everyone fell silent, listening. At first, there was nothing, just the crackling of the fire and the wind. But then they heard it, a faint rustling sound, like someone, or something, moving through the trees. "It's probably just an animal," Ethan said, trying to sound calm. But the rustling grew louder, closer. It circled the clearing just beyond the light of the fire, as if whatever was out there was watching them. Rachel shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her. "Maybe we should check it out." Ethan grabbed his flashlight and stood up. "I'll take a look. It's probably nothing." Ben, not wanting to be left behind, followed. "I'm coming with you." The two of them stepped away from the fire and into the darkness, the beams of their flashlights cutting through the thick undergrowth. The rustling sound seemed to retreat as they moved, leading them deeper into the forest. "See? There's nothing here," Ethan said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. But just as they turned to head back to camp, something caught Ben's eye. A flicker of movement just beyond the reach of his flashlight. "Wait," he said, grabbing Ethan's arm. "Did you see that?" Ethan shone his light in the direction Ben was pointing, but there was nothing. Just trees and shadows. "I didn't see anything," Ethan replied, frowning. Ben hesitated, his heart pounding. He was sure he had seen something, a figure standing between the trees. But now, it was gone. "Maybe I'm just seeing things," Ben muttered, shaking his head. "Let's go back." As they made their way back to the clearing, the forest around them seemed to grow darker, the trees pressing in closer. The rustling sound had stopped, but the silence that replaced it was somehow worse, thick and oppressive. as if the forest itself was holding its breath. When they returned to the campfire, they found Lily and Rachel huddled together, their faces pale. "What happened?" Ethan asked, concerned. "There was someone out there," Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible. "We saw them. They were standing just beyond the firelight, watching us." Ethan and Ben exchanged uneasy glances. "It was probably just your imagination," Ethan said, though he didn't sound convinced. Lily shook her head. "No, we both saw it. It was a person, or at least it looked like one." The group sat in tense silence, the fire crackling softly. The wind had died down, and the forest was unnervingly still. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden threat, every rustle of leaves a sign of something lurking just out of sight. "We should leave," Lily said, her voice trembling. "We can pack up and go. It's not worth staying here." Ethan hesitated. He didn't want to admit it, but something about the forest didn't feel right anymore. The sense of adventure that had brought them here had been replaced by a growing sense of dread. "Maybe she's right," Ben said quietly. "I don't like this." Just as they began to discuss leaving, the fire suddenly flickered and went out, plunging the clearing into darkness. Panic set in as they fumbled for their flashlights, but when they turned them on, the light barely cut through the thick shadows. "Let's go," Ethan said, his voice tight with fear. "We'll leave now." They scrambled to pack up their gear, their movements frantic. But as they worked, the rustling sound returned, louder this time and closer. It circled the clearing again, moving faster, more erratic. "We need to move," Ben shouted, grabbing his backpack. But before they could make a move, the sound stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Then, from the darkness at the edge of the clearing, a figure emerged. It was tall and thin, its features obscured by the shadows. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, watching them. Rachel gasped, stumbling backward. "What is that?" No one had an answer. The figure remained still, its presence oppressive and unnatural. "We need to run," Lily whispered, her voice shaking. Without another word, they grabbed their gear and bolted down the path they had come from. But as they ran, the forest seemed to twist and shift around them, the trees growing closer together, the path disappearing into the darkness. The figure followed, its movements slow but deliberate, always just at the edge of their vision. No matter how fast they ran, it was always there, keeping pace. By the time they reached the car, they were breathless and terrified. They piled in, Ethan fumbling with the keys as the figure stood at the edge of the trees, watching them with its unseen eyes. The car roared to life, and they sped away, the forest quickly disappearing behind them. But even as they left Graywood Forest behind, the sense of dread remained, as if something had followed them out of the woods. They never spoke of that night again, but none of them could shake the feeling that the forest had marked them, that the shadows of Graywood would never truly let them go.